class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be reviewing whatever that was between the Sharks and the Minnesota Wild, in which the Sharks ended up winning 6-5 in a game that definitely should not have been as close as it ended up being. And the game against the Chicago Blackhawks just a couple of days ago, I wasn't too worried about the 2 goals scored right near the end that made it an actual close game after the Sharks had dominated the first 57 minutes, but maybe I should have been a bit worried with what happened here tonight against the Wild. The Sharks came out blazing with a 4-goal first period to the Wild's 0, and so a 4-goal lead after 20 minutes. And so, you're not going to write the game off after just 20 minutes, but then after 40 minutes, even though the Wild did look a lot better in the second period, it was still a 4-goal lead for the Sharks, this time 6-2. And going into the third period, if you told me that a third period which included a Sharks major power play, which of course we know how good the Sharks are when it comes to major power plays. If you told me that a third period that included a Sharks 5-minute major power play, that during it also included time in which the Sharks were on a 4-on-3 as well as a 5-on-3, and then in that specific period the Sharks gave up 4 goals, or 3 goals I should say, I would have never believed you. And yet that was the case here. There was even a point when there was 3 minutes left. The Wild had 3 goals in the period, and the Wild also only had 3 shots in the period. But let's get to the scoring here. As I said, the Sharks with 4 goals in the first. Couture, Meyer, Sorensen, and Shemek, who got his first one, put the Sharks up by that 4-0 score. Then in the second period, they traded goals. It was Cunnins, which was a bit unlucky that ended up starting the scoring for the Wild, as Ferraro was going to skate after this puck, gets tripped up by Greenway. This leaves Brendan Dillon and Joe Thornton caught flat-footed, allows them to get this goal. Then it's traded back with Hertl. Then it's Eric Staal after a terrible Barclay Goodrow giveaway. Then it's Evander Kane to make it 6-2. And in the third period, it is Hunt off of a terrible Martin Jones giveaway, pulling an Aaron Dell there. A Donato goal after Erik Karlsson plays it poorly behind the net, and a Zucker goal after the Sharks, after their major power play, are just completely lost defensively, giving up this play. So the first thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, who had himself a good first period. His second period, even though he did let in 2 goals, was actually also quite strong, since the Wild did get some good chances, but his third period was just... I said this Wild had 3 shots and 3 goals, so it's not even an exaggeration to say every time the Sharks made a defensive error, for at least the first 17 minutes of this third period, the puck ended up in the back of their net. That was exactly the case, and he obviously made the terrible giveaway on Hunt's goal. I actually thought he probably even could have made the save recovering from this, but he was unable to do so. He didn't. It's tough to blame him for both the Donato and Zucker one, but still, in a situation where your team seems to just be collapsing at the seams, you want to see him make a big save, which he did end up actually making. Full credit to him. It was 6-5 Sharks. Erik Karlsson somehow completely fans on a pass here, and it allows Zach Parise, maybe not the Wild's best player, but certainly the Wild's one of their most creative players, down low one-on-one, and he somehow can't stuff it past Martin Jones. So a huge save there by Jones to, I guess, redeem himself. But in the end, it's 5 goals let in. It was 3 goals on 3 shots in that third period that made this game so close. So not a very good game for Martin Jones after having a pretty good one against the Chicago Blackhawks. Next, I will talk about this third line, such a love-hate relationship that I have with the third line of Sorensen, Thornton, and Marleau. I pointed out yesterday, I believe, that third line was likely their best line against the Blackhawks, and I thought it was actually quite good here tonight offensively. When Sorensen, Thornton, and Marleau are working in the offensive zone, it actually looks very, very nice together. But the problem is that you're stacking 2 40-year-old players on the same line, both Thornton and Marleau. And while Marleau still has a bit of gas in the tank here when it comes to speed, Thornton has very, very little. And so when this unit is on for a shift in the offensive zone, and the shift lasts longer than, let's say, 20 seconds, and these players are skating around, if the puck ends up going the other way for the other team, this unit is in pretty dire trouble when it comes to the defensive play, because Thornton and Marleau just don't really have the energy in them to actually be able to make any sort of real defensive structure happen. And as long as the other team just passes the puck around for a few seconds, they're likely going to get some openings. And that was the case here tonight, where Joe Thornton certainly struggled on the defensive side of the game. And so this line is just it's so good offensively. Well, so good is maybe an exaggeration, but it's good offensively that you want to keep it together. But the risk that you take keeping it together on the defensive side of the game, I'm not entirely sure if it's worth it. I suspect the line still remains together, at least going into the next one. But I wonder if this is actually a long-term play for the San Jose Sharks, because it's quite precarious. And then finally, I will talk about Brendan Dillon, as he has probably been the Sharks player that has suffered the most from the return of Radim Simek. Of course, Brendan Dillon was slotted firmly into the top 4 Sharks defenders when Simek was out with injury. Him, Vlasic, Karlsson, Burns. Dillon was averaging over 20 minutes a game. At times, he was getting over 22 and even over 23 minutes in games. And yet now, in these previous 2 games here against the Wild and against the Blackhawks, he actually has not reached the 20-minute mark. Tonight here, he played less than 14 minutes. He was a -4 at that. And so not only has Brendan Dillon been suffering on just the ice time part of it, because Simek has taken that role, but he's also suffering in his actual play in general. And you could, sort of blame that, I guess, on the fact that he is playing with Ferraro, who is a rookie, and they're both left-handed defensemen, so it's a bit awkward on the ice, but still, it was a very, very, very down game here for Brendan Dillon, being a -4 when the Sharks had 4 even-strength goals of their own, so quite disappointing to see, certainly. And with him now sort of finding himself as a 5th / I guess technically 5th, because he wouldn't be considered the 6th with Ferraro on the team. It's a weird situation, I guess, for the Sharks, because Dillon had been one of their best and most consistent defenders for the first dozen or so games. Karlsson, Vlasic, and Burns had tendencies to have some bad games. Karlsson and Vlasic, of course, stick out in particular as having some pretty bad games to start the year, but Dillon was never caught in that situation. And so I sort of do feel for him in the fact that Simek comes back after having not played for a very, very long time and immediately is thrusted into this top 4 role of playing penalty kill consistently and playing, over 20 minutes a night, while Dillon is immediately put back onto the back burner. I mean, the amount of times we're seeing Vlasic and Karlsson get a penalty killing shift and then it immediately shift over to Burns and Simek, when it would always be Brendan Dillon getting a time on the ice for penalty kill. It's pretty jarring, to say the least, and it is a big change here for Dillon on this year, and hopefully he can at least adjust to this new position, because unless an injury happens, I don't see it changing anytime soon with how strong Simek has been defensively in his career and in these first couple of games. Although Simek, he made some nice plays in this one, but also some, somewhat decently sized errors. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. They will face off against the Nashville Predators. And so these are 2 wins now in a row for the San Jose Sharks, but it's important to remember that these are 2 wins coming against 2 not so great teams in the Western Conference, both the Chicago Blackhawks and the Minnesota Wild. And considering the fact that those 2 games, while the Sharks were dominant at times in both of them, they also managed to let both teams claw back in, making them basically 1-goal games in each one, although the Blackhawks game, they did get the empty net. And so if they make similar mistakes against a team like the Nashville Predators, they're immediately going to get punished even more significantly than they were in these past couple of games. Just recall the first game the Sharks played against the Predators this season, in which the Sharks actually played a pretty decent game, but because of way too many defensive mistakes, they ended up losing that game 5-2. So they're going to need to bring their A game and actually bring their A game for the full 60 minutes instead of just 57, or instead of just, 20 like they did in these past couple of games. Class dismissed.